Welcome to another episode of Crypto Capsule Commentary, where I answer some of the questions that I get from all of you around the world every week. But today for a special edition episode where we're going to discuss the impact of the country of El Salvador recognizing Bitcoin as legal tender. We're going to discuss what that means, what is the impact of global finance, and what are the next steps we should expect. Hope you're ready, because here we go. This episode is brought to you by Q9 Capital, a platform I personally use. Q9 are bringing a private wealth experience and one of the broadest product sets in crypto directly to young professionals, high net worth investors, wealth managers, and corporate. They're offering free cold storage to all new clients and a 12% yield on USD stablecoins. Check out the link above for more details. Okay, so the big news happened on Sunday, June 6th, where the president of El Salvador, Nayib Bukele, basically mentioned that he's going to propose a new piece of law that will make Bitcoin legal tender in the country. And first of all, maybe before we go to what that means, maybe a bit of background. El Salvador, for those of you who don't know, is a small country, has about 6.4 million people. 20% of the population live in extreme poverty or poverty. 70% of the country is unbanked. There's even 16% of the GDP of the country are remittances coming from abroad, mainly from the United States. Also, some interesting facts that are important to remember when we talk about the accepting Bitcoin as legal tender is that today, 2/3 of exports of the country go to the United States. And fun fact as well, El Salvador today is a dollarized economy. It means the legal tender they use every day is not a local currency, but the US dollar. It's one of the few countries in the world like that. In Latin America, there's Ecuador, obviously El Salvador, there's Timor-Leste in Africa, there's Palau, Micronesia, and many others. But again, this is very important to remember as we try to analyze what that means. So first of all, what are the positives of this news? Of course, first of all, I think this is great for the Bitcoin community. It's the first time that Bitcoin is being recognized as legal tender. Japan came getting pretty close in 2017, but it recognized Bitcoin as an asset, as a means of payment, but not as legal tender, which has a specific legal definition. It means that then anybody that you owe a debt, they have to accept Bitcoin. Same applies for any other obligations, taxes, and so on and so forth. Second thing, actually, which I think is very positive, this brought more attention on the Lightning Network. As you know, the Bitcoin network is a bit clunky, it's a bit slow, it's not good for small payments and transactions going on. This is why there's a layer 2 solution called the Bitcoin Lightning Network. I think the good thing with this El Salvador news is that it brought a bit more attention on the Bitcoin Lightning Network, which frankly, I think although the Lightning Network is not perfect, at least it deserves a bit more discussion and conversation around, which I think this is quite positive from that perspective. And third, frankly, it's good for El Salvador. Since the announcement on Sunday, June 6th, you had numerous crypto companies that have announced they want to set up a presence in El Salvador. There's been obviously came up in discussions quite a bit. So I think from that perspective, it could be quite a net positive from the country. Now, a couple of considerations. I think this is all good. This is actually pretty good for Bitcoin and crypto, but really there are some practical considerations now for the country that I think that are worth discussing. One of them is the choice of Bitcoin. Again, let's not forget what I just mentioned. El Salvador is a dollarized economy. Everybody just uses US dollars there. And if the majority of remittance are coming from the United States, I think if the problem they're trying to solve is the remittance problem, is in the fees in the process, there's actually could have been argued using US dollar stable coins could have been probably even better because there's no conversion there's no FX needed. If somebody can send US dollar stable coins from the US, family can get it in El Salvador, bum, very easy from that perspective, the remittance can be made. Of course, here I think the argument that has been made from the government is that in a way, there is with all the levels of quantitative easing that took place, there's inflation, there's currency devaluation, and at least allowing people to hold Bitcoin gives them actually a hedge against a potential currency devaluation and the record levels of money printing that took place. But again, I think that's one of the considerations. Probably the second biggest consideration, which I think is very important, is obviously this is going to raise issues for a lot of the local banks with their US correspondent banks. Whether we like it or not, and I think I've discussed this many times in my newsletters, the amount of criminal activity, money laundering happening in crypto is significantly smaller than what happens in the traditional financial space. But that being said, the fact that now the banks can use Bitcoin as legal tender will for sure raise issues with the correspondent banks and the different counterparties that the financial institutions and entities in the country have. So definitely that's one of the things I'm watching. I think I would expect some pushback Let's not forget another country, the Marshall Islands, a couple of years ago, came out with their own digital currency, the SOV, and they got immediate backlash from the US and the IMF, who tried to put pressure on them to actually drop the idea and threatening them to cut them from global finance. I would not be surprised the same thing happens here in El Salvador. Number three, the thing that I'm watching is some very practical considerations. Obviously, in El Salvador, there's a central bank, whether actually they're going to start holding Bitcoin as well as reserves. I would argue that probably is worth is a bigger deal than even making a legal tender. So as a central bank, if they start holding Bitcoin as well. So that's definitely one thing I'm watching. And number four, I think another thing is important is that there's a number of considerations that will need to be worked through. I mean, a part of the legal and financial counterparty considerations, one of them is as simple as like accounting and tax. I mean, think about today, if the items going to be priced in US dollars and you can pay them in Bitcoin, or they'll also be priced in Bitcoin, which obviously the value fluctuates. If somebody's a company or somebody's holding Bitcoin and the value falls by 20%, what happens there? Is it a loss? What happens? What's the impact from an accounting perspective, from a tax perspective? So there's a number of considerations that will need to be worked through. Again, there'll be very, very interesting questions to see what happens there. What I'm watching right now, there's a couple of things that I'm watching. First of all is really what's going to be a practical impact. How much backlash is El Salvador going to get, especially from countries like the US? I would expect this is not ideally very good news. So I'm very watching what is the geopolitical and especially some of the financial counterparty reaction to the news of El Salvador. And second thing that I'm watching is that if there is a snowball effect, literally in the couple hours following the announcement from El Salvador, we had countries like Panama, Paraguay, Brazil, or Argentinian, actually politicians from these countries that have proposed that they should probably do doing the same. So it'll be very interesting to see if other countries follow suit and actually try to embark and either embrace Bitcoin or actually try to recognize it as a legal tender. So very, very interesting perspective from that perspective. Guys, that's all for today. Definitely a very important development to watch. If you have any questions you want me to answer, feel free to ask them in the comments below. Or if you want to send them privately, you can send them by direct message on LinkedIn and Twitter. I promise I'll get back to them as soon as I can. Thank you very much, everybody, and thank you for joining me for another episode of Crypto Capsule Commentary. See you guys soon.